we're now going to the plenary session. I am well aware that we are running behind, and I think we're just going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to just wrap up and think about how we have answered the questions that we set out for the conference. So if anyone who has been a presenter in the conference, if you would like to join in the plenary session, could you please turn on your video, unmute yourself, and then we're going to have a discussion. I want to say first that I knew I would definitely have Daniela Monasteros Tan in the plenary session, because this is what we do in our fortnightly podcast, which we've done for a few years now. We have nearly 90 episodes, and it is a wonderful space that we hold for each other, where we basically talk a lot and then decide like, okay, we now have to record because we have no more time. And then our podcast episodes are always distillations of what has come before. So this feels like an ITV episode. Thank you so much, Danny, for being here throughout the conference. And thank you to everyone else who is joining us in the plenary session. So I want to just bring up again, the guiding questions for the conference I posed at the very beginning. The first, how do fashion practitioners who have ties to Southeast Asia engage with the South, their local and regional communities, as well as the global fashion system? I think I'm just gonna pose a question and we can answer it together, and then we'll move on to the next question before I wrap up the conference. So I'll start by trying to answer this question. I think, what has bowled me over in this conference is really how rich everyone's practices are and how thoughtful, and really how everyone is indeed engaging with the South, the local and regional communities, and the global fashion system. It is something that we do, I guess, right? As human beings who inhabit the world, I guess it's quite a rhetorical question in that sense. But I think what I want to point out is the thoughtfulness, the agency, and also the confidence that everyone feels in having a hand, right, in expressing themselves through various aspects of fashion, and also feeling confident enough that it's good enough. Because, for a long, long time, I think when I say that fashion has been kind of off-center, and not in the multi-centered sense, but just being off-center, being on the margins, it has been because in our own thoughts and in the media, it always seems to be that what we do here is derivative of what we see elsewhere, what we observe elsewhere. But we are kind of trying to say, no, we're resisting it, right? We're no longer kind of accepting that narrative. And I think that has come through very strongly for me in all the presentations. And that has made me feel, I don't know, this collective pride in what we're kind of doing independently. But now that we know, okay, there are also others doing it at the same time. As I think what Singh said at the beginning of today's sessions, that collective resistance is gonna matter and is gonna be helpful. So I wonder, I don't know, Danny, do you wanna try to answer this question, or maybe respond to how I've responded?
Yeah, I think as I was looking at the 3 guiding questions again, I think something that came to my mind is, Southeast Asia in terms of fashion in the global industry has often been a producer of fashion, like fast fashion, or for other big global brands. And it was so interesting yesterday to hear from Tao, from Kilomat, and from Toton, and then today looking at Chakai's practice, this idea of actually by taking back that production, that making of fashion and materials, we're able to connect with communities and create fashion from our point of views. So it's taking back that, being a factory for the rest of the world, and instead we're becoming the makers with our own points of view. So that was really, I think, strong for me to think about.
Well, the rest of you in this session, if you want to chime in, please feel free. The 5 move. Yes, Wabi.
Totally agree with you, Nadia. And I think it's about time. It's a long time coming for us, because I think as a Southeast Asian, part of the geography has suffered. We've all been bent out of shape to conform to what we are, and we've actually coming out of traumas that have, we were there were things that we were conditioned to be ashamed about ourselves for a long time, and now we're all kind of undoing it in the way that we are literally fashioning ourselves in forming our, not just the outside, but the way we think, the way we approach things, the way we are in community, the way we are in a global global stage. We're affirming that parts of ourselves that were for a long time in the background. Actually, in my context here, what we call baduy in the Philippines, or what we term as like things that we won't admit because these were the things that we grew up in, and our mother's way of decorating the house, those are kitsch, those are baduy, but those are now foment for interesting, creative interpretations. And I've seen it happen more and more, and I'm very excited how this is gonna even further the conversation. So this conference is really timely.
Thank you for that, Wawi. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like we're kind of like preaching to the choir here, right? Like we know. So, it's also, but I think what's great about it is then it's nice to know that there are others doing the same thing, just like with the PHX fashion group, right? It's about kind of building that community, because community is quite loose in that sense, right? I mean, you kind of need someone, you kind of need some people to be like, okay, hey, actually we do share some similar ideals, and we can get together and we can do more with more people. So I now want to go to the next question, which is, what are the ideas and values that underpin the work that we do here in the Southeast Asian fashion community? I want to bring up two things that I think have emerged and kind of floated out there throughout the conference. The first is the idea of respect. I think there is deep respect for what has come before us. And I mean, Wabi, you just said that as well, right? Like the way we were brought up, the way that, we're now kind of also, I think, feeling maybe even to say like less embarrassed of, what we have, the richness that we have. Because I think for a long time, we would think that local is not as great as global, is not as forward as global. But I see that being reclaimed now. And I think, Danny, you kind of brought that up, with kind of taking back the production, showing that we're not just here to receive instruction to make something that's cookie cutter, but that we have creative agency that we can exercise, that we do exercise. And we do that also through, this respect that we have for ourselves and for our agency. So I think respect is a really big idea that I want to bring up. And I also think that we want to think about making things of lasting value. It's not just about kind of like, okay, you're here to make a living. And I mean, that's what I think Jaya and Gandhi were saying, right? That we do need to make a living. We don't, come from privileged backgrounds necessarily, but we're going to then use that to do what is meaningful to us. So there's this also like deep-seated kind of desire to be creative, to say something, to make something. I see Chaman, you've joined us. Might you like to say something about the second question?
Hi. Yeah. It's funny because I heard quite a bit of the sessions today, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, respect, creativity, what Wawi said, it's timely, but it's also like there's no anger. It feels like everyone is at a point now where it's like, what, this is the future and we have a say in it. And I just, and Nadia, with what you said just now, I think there's two things that come to my mind. With respect comes this idea of, respecting the complexity, the history, everything that comes before, and how do we collectively find a way to communicate that? And in my work, I think what the last few years have sort of kind of taught us is that it's the hyper local that's international. It's like the super duper small feelings and the connections that you have with your immediate community and the communities that prior to these conversations that we're having, they were always so far away, but actually, there's so many things that connect us. And it's just something that I go to bed thinking, wow, it's so hyper local, it's international. It makes me really happy because it means that we can be proud, as opposed to, that feeling I think is gone. I just wanted to share that because it's been really inspiring.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. I think this idea of in this region, we've always accepted the fact that there are so many realities and so many points of views that are just living in the same place. But I think it was clear in like Peter's talk, for example, and just this idea that we've, accept our own culture, but then we have the outsider culture, and then we just layer all these things together, and there isn't that separation. They just kind of, okay, we move along with all this multiplicity of influences, some of them violent and some of them not, some of them adapted by us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And we move swiftly to the third question because we are running out of time. So what are the common threats and unique characteristics that define fashion from the region, if any? I don't know. I mean, I would say that, there are, of course, we've kind of talked about, some of the common ideas and threats. I think yesterday in my closing remarks, I talked about, for example, the importance of self-fashioning, how it is necessarily based on hybridity. I mean, that is not specific to the Southeast Asian context, but of course we have our own kind of hybridity. And there is this kind of like common language we speak sometimes, like if, let's say you're traveling, you meet someone who is from Southeast Asia, you kind of like can talk, I don't know, there's like some commonalities, there's some common experiences. And I think that's nice, that sense of community. And then I also talked about the idea of crowdsourcing, right? And I think, this conference has been a kind of crowdsourcing ideas, crowdsourcing that feeling of connection, as you said, Chomwan, right? That connection is so important. And also this kind of pride in the cultures and knowledge, which is now coupled with ambition and intention. I like how Danny and Chomwan, you both said, like, it's really not about suppressing any of it anymore, but there's also no anger in it. It's just about embracing all of who we are. And I think when Gandhi was asking in the very last session, like, how can I be Sikh and gay at the same time, kind of a question, it's really about how I think now we can embrace all aspects of our identity, or we feel more confident to do that. And it is part of this, I guess, wave of, individualism, if you will. But that's also been really nice, because then in being individual, we are actually being our truest self, and then we can find our real community. So it kind of comes back to that. And I think one thing I want to say is that the region has just this very rich diversity. And I think it's up to us to see how we can celebrate that. I remember now, Toton was saying yesterday during his panel that, he didn't want to do like a print or anything like it. It's just not the point, right? It's really about the taking back the ownership and being the maker, as you've also pointed out so eloquently in this plenary session, Danny. So I wonder for all of you who are still here in this session, for you, what are the common threats and unique characteristics that define fashion in the region, if you've observed any from this conference or you've been thinking about for some time?
I think I had resistance to the word fashion, before I felt icky being associated with it, even if I liked it, because it was so frivolous. It didn't mean, I was part of the society that, needs commenting, being critical. It used to be the other camp of critical, right? The other side of critical would be like this kind of removed from reality. So now I think fashion can be used as a way to address things that are currently ongoing, even this kind of personal contamination that feels a little bit, not settled in. And I think that was addressed by Gandhi in his works as well. And, our shifting poles in our identities, and the way we kind of achieve some kind of resolution is to just embrace it, like you said, Nadia, right? I mean, let it all out. If it's confused, it's confused. If it's contaminated, it's contaminated. And I've used that in the way I said, okay, so you're a hybrid, you're this and that, you're living a post-colony, but you're adapting to their lifestyle or something like that. Then yes, I'm a walking petri dish of this this scenario, right? So I guess that's an ongoing dialogue as we live, right? I mean, what do you think? I'm sure I'm not the only one feeling this way.
Oh, you're not. And I think, yesterday we had that. I feel like yesterday we had a thread of like messiness. We were thinking that it's just all very messy. And sometimes it's like, we really assert our identity, and sometimes it's like we just don't. But it's all part of the journey, it's all part of life. And I like that you're also saying like, I thought this, but then I thought that. And it's like, oh, whatever, it's confusing, it's contaminated, it's contaminated. And I think it's really about unlearning, right? As we learn more about ourselves and about others and about all of it, right? We're also unlearning. And that has been, I think, the most precious thing to me from this conference. So I thank all of you here in this plenary session with me, Daniela, Wawi, and Chomwan. And I'm just gonna say a few last words about the conference before we end. So we have come to the end of Front and Off Center, Fashion in Southeast Asia. Thank you to Dr. Acacia Finbo at the Cohort Research Forum for making this online conference such a seamless experience. I could not have done this without you. And thank you to all the presenters and chairpersons for your time and enriching the event with all the amazing work that you do. I look forward to seeing all that you continue to do. And I would again like to acknowledge, of course, the limitations of the conference. This is by no means exhaustive, and there is so much more to uncover. I've enjoyed hearing all the stories that have been shared, especially processes and motivations behind creative and practical decisions that have been made. I look forward to seeking, listening to, and highlighting more stories of more practitioners in the years to come. If you are similarly interested in stories on fashion in Southeast Asia, come join us over at Fashion and Market on Instagram and visit us on fashionandmarket.net. There's already a trove of stories published, and we will only add more. I look forward to the next time we gather to talk about fashion in Southeast Asia, online or in person. Till then, goodbye.